Okay, so I'll start. We are looking at obviously, covering our learning outcome 2, which is to do with, the organization behavior unit that we have started. And in learning outcome 2, we are looking at understanding what is motivation, the concept of motivation, why is it important in organizations. We are going to look at a lot of motivational theories. I wanted to club them together. There is a mind map which I'll show you, which has got a lot of these theories, and there's a lot of work which has been done by different types of people over the years and decades. But we wanted to organize them into process and content theories in particular, which is going to help obviously do our study with relation to learning outcome to a bit more focused, make it a bit more focused. Now, the main understanding that we need to be able to get from learning outcome 2 is to get into an understanding what is motivation as a concept, why is it important in the context of organization, what are the key theories which have kind of been worked on over the years and in decades and over this, I would say, centuries even. And then why are they relevant to a particular organization, and especially when people within the organization are responsible for managing employees, or they are responsible for managing and supervising output of employees, and how do they maintain and use these motivation theories to maintain an effective workforce, a workforce which is delivering, and a workforce which is motivated, loyal, and willing to take on more challenges for the organization to be able to, help them achieve its goals and objective. Now, this particular learning outcome focuses on applying. It is not a theoretical learning outcome, so it is apply. That means whatever knowledge that we gain out of today by studying the motivational theories, at some stage, what we need to be able to do is, first part is study of the theories, and second part is to apply these motivational theories to different aspects of workforce behavior in an organization. And that would mean things like jobs description. It'll look at things like job satisfaction. It'll look at self-esteem. It'll look at certain aspects of reward and compensation management, goal setting, which is done in particular within the organization by managers. And then look at the key aspect of what is called the job characteristic model, JCM, which is one of the models that we would want to study to understand, how job characteristics and job descriptions are set by managers within the organization. They would take into account skills, the tasks which our employees are expected to do, what is the significance of those tasks, and to what extent with the employee working and getting those tasks and responsibilities has an autonomy to be able to obviously work towards them. And then how the employee is essentially able to feedback, say for example, the response, the supervision, the support, and the guidance which the employee gets in terms of accomplishing that task back into the organization. So we look at the JCM model, the job characteristic model, which was proposed by Richard Hackman and Greg Oldman in the 1970s. And this is based on, the 5 core job characteristics which are used to design a job specification. Now, in this particular, learning outcome, we are also going to be looking at, when I say applying the content and process theories, which is what the, learning outcome focuses on, we're going to be looking at, in particular, talking about content theories which are related to things like Maslow's theory of needs or hierarchy of needs. We're looking at Herzberg's 2-factor theory. We'll also be looking at, McClelland's theory, and they are considered as what are called content theories. So we look into why they are classed as content theories, and some theories which are primarily related to process, and why they are classed as process theories. So the idea would be to understand the background and how they have come about, and over the years how this is then being used within organizations to essentially help managers manage the expectation of the employees through reward, compensation, and keep them going and keep them motivated towards the organization. Now, when we talk about these theories, we will also be looking at a video. There is a video that I've shortlisted, which is a very good video from a site which I'm not going to play in full. It's a 10-minute long video, but it explains in a good way and gives you a very good overview of all the main types of theories that we should be having a good understanding of in terms of motivation. And they include theories of motivations which are from both content and process theories point of view. So there are some theories that we might not be looking at covering because they're not given in the indicative content, things like the equity theory, the ERG theory. Obviously, we'll be looking at studying Maslow's theory of hierarchy, the ones which have been named here, but things like the expectancy theory, reinforcement theory, and theory X and Y, which is obviously covered. So those which are not covered and those which are covered are going to be a part and parcel of this video, which I'm going to put a link of in the further reading towards the end of the presentation, and that would hopefully help you to go through them at some stage at your own, and then also get a bit of a broader understanding of why these theories came about, and what is the relevance of these theories as well. Now, main focus that we want to do, if the presentation on our session becomes a bit longer today, would be to try and focus on the understanding of the motivation theories today, and that could be part 1. And if we have to do, we will do another part 2, which will be primarily related to the application of these theories that we need to understand from a point of view of the task and assessment criteria that have been kept in this particular learning outcome. So let's start off with this discussion, and what I'm going to do is show you a presentation and the few slides which I've prepared. And these presentation slides will also be available up on Moodle just after the session. And the session, obviously, if you need to revisit the recording of the session, this is going to be available to you on the YouTube channel, and from where you will be able to access it for the purposes of your review. So let's begin with our discussion on this, and I'm going to switch you over to the presentation slides. So here we go. So just to check that everyone is able to see this clearly and hear me okay. So what I would want to do is start off with a basic few points in terms of understanding, key terminology, which is related to what is motivation. Now, can we define motivation? There are different meanings. Obviously, there's no one such specific definition. We can define motivation in many different ways. But I've picked out, 2 or 3 different types of definitions, which could be things related to what makes a person do a certain thing in a certain way. What are the factors which sometimes you consider that should I do this job, or should I take this job, or should I complete this task, or should I not complete this task? And why does it happen that sometimes when you're given a situation, or you are in a situation, you behave in a particular way because you feel that, no, this is not for me, or, you sometimes feel that, if I do this, what do I get? There's nothing that I would gain from this. So all these are, things which are related to what we call motivation. And sometimes if we look at this as in the context of, motivation and the definition of the meaning word motivation, you're looking at basically reasons for acting in a particular way, and that would be termed as the term motivation. Now, why is motivation important? And why is it something that is a constant topic of study in psychology? So when we talk about motivation from a point of view of psychology and what it means, there are lots of different meanings of this which are at times used, and this is something which is what we need to understand in this learning outcome. So generally, when I say there is a person's desire to do something which is fueled by a background, or fueled by a reason in the background that I want to do this because I want to get that. Sometimes you would see, if I just give you a simple example, kids at home, and sometimes we negotiate, we get into the process of negotiation and deliberation with our superiors, with our managers. Your idea of looking at negotiating and deliberating and obviously getting into a discussion is to get some leeway or get some, sweeteners. And this primarily is also, a reason why you would be wanting somebody to preach to you, to say, why, what is it in for me, and why should I look at this, or why should I look at the process of taking on this activity or taking on this particular job. So when we talk about goals in life in general, whether they are personal, professional, whether they are competitive, whether they are based on certain key expectations from the society, sometimes you would see that in trying to achieve these goals, what you will generally see is that people would get motivated, or people would be more tuned to doing something, is because of the fact that they are being, let's say, influenced, or they are being led in a particular way. And that would be in terms of their selfish reasons of what I gain or what I get from this. And that is where we would see motivation would be something quite important. Now, one of the other things that we would also look at is when we talk about motivation and motivation management as a topic, you cannot have a function, or an employee or maybe a department within the organization which does not look after its employees, staff, suppliers, contractors, whatever it is, because they all need a reason to work, and they all need a reason to achieve certain targets or goals and objectives which have been set. And in order for them to achieve these goals and objectives, you have what is called motivation. So if I work in an organization 9 to 5 and I complete their tasks which is given to me, what is the motivation that I get at the end of the day? I get my wages, I get my salary. Now, if you're in sales, or if you're in a different function like business development or BD as we call it, what will generally happen is that you would be motivated to achieve or go over and above the achievement of the goals, is because you'll be getting some incentives, or you'll be getting something, which is going to be extra. And in those cases, you would generally feel that, again, the topic of motivation comes up, because of the fact that this is something that you desire, and this particular fulfillment of job that you're doing is helping you essentially to achieve that objective. So in some cases, I would see salespeople, they work quite hard because they would want to maybe achieve that incentive, get that bonus. And, there could be variety of things that the, different types of things which the, employer would want in return. And that is the expectation of the fulfillment of objectives. And in those cases, this approach of pull and push actually tends to work, wherein, employers give a goal, set a goal, and the employees go about achieving that goal, or go about achieving that target, thereby achieving that goal. And in return, you get something back, which could be salary. In terms of the salary, apart from that, maybe get some bonus, maybe get some additional incentives, and that would be termed as the way wherein you are motivating or keeping your employees motivated to be able to go to work or do some work for you. Now, when we look at understanding this phenomenon of motivation in general, so what we want to be able to do is look at some theories and look at some examples in general to, get into from a point of view of, getting into understanding why it is important as a concept. So let's look at a particular video that I've got. And in that video, what I want to do is basically show, a summary of what is the topic of motivation, what are the theories which have evolved over the years, and let's look at some examples. So let me just switch you over to a video, a small video which I want to play, and that video should essentially allow you to understand and get a grasp of this concept that we want to look at, which is motivation and motivation theories. So let me just switch you over, and here we go. Right. So let's look at listening into this particular video.
What do you think is motivating you to read this lesson at this very moment? Motivation refers to the reasons that we act towards a goal. Psychologists understand that motivation can only be understood through behavior. Although only you can fully explain the many factors that have you reading this lesson right now, psychologists have created theories to try to understand and explain this behavior. For these theories, we can make a few educated guesses about your present situation. You are not worried about being hit by a car. Most likely you are at home or in another location where you feel safe. You are probably not hungry to the point of starving. Perhaps you are even snacking while you read this. You are not outside in freezing weather or a hurricane or sitting in a desert without water. These are just a few of the guesses we can make based on a theory of motivation developed by famous behavioral psychologist Abraham Maslow. Maslow believed that basic needs must be met before we can satisfy our other, less basic needs. This was structured as a hierarchy of needs that is often shown in a pyramid and referred to as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Just as the ancient Egyptians built a pyramid from the bottom up, we must satisfy our needs from the bottom up, fulfilling the most important needs first. Who would build the top of the pyramid before its foundation? Although Maslow's pyramid mostly speaks to human motivation, all organisms act on drives, which are essentially motivator stimuli. We all have a drive to eat every day. Our bodies tell us when we are hungry, with an empty feeling in our stomachs. When we are confronted by a feeling of hunger, what is our most common reaction?
So as you can see, I'm going to play this video in full. Give me a second.
It mostly speaks to human motivation. All organisms act on drives, which are essentially motivator stimuli. We all have a drive to eat every day. Our bodies tell most common.
Okay, so let me just refresh this 1 second.
Preschool. Sunlight, one need, such as hanging out with friends.
Back to the video.
Or achieving educational goal. The need for their human drives include the need for water, air to breathe, elimination of waste, and the biological need to have sex. Often without conscious thought, these drives are fulfilled before any other drives, such as hanging out with friends or achieving educational goals. An excellent example of drives and drive reduction can be found in watching a dog that is both hungry and tired. Imagine the dog is resting but sees his owner bring food to his bowl. This dog is left to fulfill one need, sleeping or eating. Trying to do both would be funny, but ultimately impossible. If the dog is too tired, he will ignore the food and go to sleep. Alternately, if the dog is more hungry than tired, he will get up and walk to the food. Another example is a plant moving towards the sunlight. In satisfying its need for sun, food, it is operating on drive reduction. Intrinsic motivation is defined as the desire to perform an activity due to enjoyment. People have widely different interests that motivate them to behave simply for fun. What are you motivated to do for pleasure? Do you like to read? Do you hike, bike, or run? Is your favorite pastime watching movies? What makes you feel good? Any answer you give can be an example of intrinsic motivation. Let's look at motivation in a different way. Often in elementary school, children are given rewards and prizes for reading the most books or pages. What if there was $1 million at the finish line of a marathon? Certainly, we're more motivated to perform these activities when we are rewarded for them. This motivation from an outside source is called extrinsic motivation. Although you may gain other benefits from running a marathon, winning $1 million is a strong motivation from an outside source. Extrinsic motivation can also be caused by fear of punishment. Did your parents ever limit your time watching television with the threat of punishment? A very common type of extrinsic motivation is getting paid at work. We work to collect money that will fulfill our needs of food, water, and shelter. Many people also enjoy their jobs, which is an example of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation at work. To quickly review, motivation refers to the reasons that we act towards a goal. Motivation was studied by famous behavioral psychologist Abraham Maslow, who created a concept that came to be known as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a hierarchy of needs that is often organized in the shape of a pyramid. What this hierarchy shows us is that all organisms act on drives, which are essentially motivator stimuli. Drives are motivations of things like shelter, food, and health, all of which outweigh motivations for things like friendship, creativity, and exercise.
So that's repeating now. So basically, if you see, the initial part of this particular video was useful because it explained to us what does motivation essentially mean. And when we look at this particular concept that everybody does everyone does lots of things, but sometimes these things are motivated, or you are in a way tempted to do these things because at the end of it, you're receiving some sort of a reward. And I think the example that was given in the video, which I think stands out, is when we look at elementary school or primary school education, sometimes teachers obviously reward learners or students in terms of doing certain works, and that is done primarily to get them into taking up or developing a particular habit. When we see this at a mature level, what you're going to see is that employers essentially use motivation and motivational techniques to be able to get things done repeatedly, to hit targets repeatedly, and to ensure that they are able to, hit the goals, or basically achieve the goals and hit the targets which have been set by the management. And in order to do so, what they will use is, or fall back on, is the carrot and stick approach, sometimes we call it, or basically in this case, a motivational approach, which will allow them to reward the employees for showing certain types of behavior, which is basically expected of them. And that expected behavior is classed in their job description. And when it is a part and parcel of their job description, and if employees, staff, partners, suppliers, whichever way you look at it, if they achieve and complete the jobs and tasks which are given, at the end of it, they are expected to get a reward, or at the end of it, they're expected to get salary or wages. And that would be a way wherein the staff and employees would then look at obviously bringing things or buying things, which could be as talked about by taking an example of Maslow's theory of hierarchy. There would be different types of needs at different level. If you're in junior management, or if you're somebody who's just joined a company, you'll probably be looking at your basic needs. If this is a first job that you've started, you're looking at basically your basic needs of food, water, shelter. But if you're somebody who's working higher up in the organization, have spent a number of years, you would be looking at different kinds of needs, and they would be your needs primarily based on say, for example, safety. That is to say, you would want maybe job security in your from your organization. There could be needs, somebody who's senior enough in the management or further senior up in the management. There could be needs which are going to be esteem needs, or needs wherein you're looking at implementing and putting into practice the experience and the number of years of experience that you've put in, and the experience that you've gained. You would want to put it into practice. And that is where you see people in the senior management or the top management of the company look at taking bolder decisions, or look at taking or making essentially decisions which would be classed as quite challenging. And they are able to do so because they have experienced these situations in the past, and that these situations that they've gone through and have experienced in the past have allowed them to build knowledge, and that knowledge is being put into, which is essentially self-actualization, or the top of the Maslow's pyramid, wherein he proposed that. So generally speaking, in summary, I would say, when we look at motivation and factors which affect motivation and why this is a topic of interest, in most organizations, we are looking at understanding the reasons of how people would be able to, essentially get, say, work done. And essentially, in the bargain, in the long run, when they are able to get the work done, they are also keeping their employees motivated, loyal towards the organization. And that is where you're looking at the concept of motivation coming in. Now, when we talked about the different types of theories, there are two types, or they can be grouped into two categories. And these tend to be content theories, and the other tend to be process theories. So when we talk about content theories, here we are looking at factors which motivate individuals in their workplace, individual factors which can motivate you to work, come to your place of work, and obviously, be motivated to essentially achieve and perform in your role on a daily basis. Process theories, on the other side, focus on what is called the cognitive process. So when we talk about cognitive process, what we are looking at is that individuals, they want to be involved in the decision-making cycle or decision-making process within the organization. So here, they would not want to just work as workers within the organization, but they would want to use their knowledge and skills that they've gained over the years through the acquisition of, or say, study of qualifications, or gaining experience by working within organizations. They would want then to be used in the process when they deliver the work for the employer. So in this case, it is going to be looking at they being able to be, let's say, a part and parcel of the decision-making process at whatever level it is. And in that decision-making process, what they are looking at doing is they are looking at utilizing their past experiences, their abilities, their skills, and also the knowledge that they have gained over the years, both on maybe on the work side and also through the academic route in terms of studies. And that is where they would be, more, let's say, they'll be more motivated to work within those organizations wherein they are able to, participate in that process. And when I say that process, the cognitive process, wherein they are able to use their mental functions essentially, and that would allow them to have ownership of the role or the responsibility and the job that they discharge or the responsibilities that they carry out. They have the ownership of that in delivering those roles and in delivering those day-to-day functions within their roles and responsibilities. Now, there are several theories which obviously several psychologists have studied, and in this case, you have content theories, wherein you have the Alderfer's, theory, you have Herzberg's theory, you have the two-factor theory of factor X and Y, you have the Maslow's hierarchy of need, and then you also have the McClelland's theory of needs, which is where we will look at some of these in a bit more detail. Now, and on the process side, you have the Adams equity theory, you have Latham's Locke's goal-setting theory, Porter's and Lawler's expectancy theory. Now, there are subtle differences between these theories, and that is what we will discuss in a bit more detail as we go along in our discussion into understanding all these motivational theories. Now, let's start with the first one, and feel free to ask me any questions that you have at any given stage, because this part of the discussion that we are doing is mostly theoretical. Some of these you need to learn and understand, and obviously the practical applications of this is what we will study when we talk about the application of motivational theories. Now, when we talk about the Alderfer's ERG theory, what we basically look at in the ERG theory, which Alderfer actually proposed, he basically looked at, in a nutshell, three aspects which he says that employees or people are motivated towards. So when you talk about ERG, E stands for existence needs, R stands for related needs, and G stands for growth needs. So if I look at segmenting this is what the ERG essentially stands for in the theory that he essentially suggested. Now, his theory was an adaptation, I would say, of the Maslow's theory of hierarchy, and what he initially did in terms of some sort of work was that his main aspect was that the human needs are divided into three different types. And when we talk about these three different types of needs, what we are looking at is they being categorized into what are called essentially the existence need, related needs, and growth needs. So when we look at Maslow's theory, he proposed a pyramid which was essentially 5 different types of needs, starting from psychological to safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. What Alderfer did was, as per his theory and the work that he did, he grouped these 5 types of needs into 3 different categories. So safety and physiological needs were, clubbed into what are called the existence needs. The love and belonging and esteem needs were clubbed into what are called the relative needs. related needs, and the last, which is in terms of self-actualization, which is with esteem and self-actualization needs, were classed as what are called growth needs. Now, his main purpose of, when we talk about his theory and what he proposed, essentially was that these needs need to be identified by employers, and if these needs are known, then what the employers can do is create effective job descriptions and give roles to the employees in an effective way, which will allow them to realize their potential and obviously carry out the tasks and functions to the best of their abilities, using these needs and the requirements that they know of. So his main idea was to try and look at proposing the fact that if somebody, for example, has certain types of needs, and if they are not being met, then people will essentially redouble their efforts to fulfill those needs, but through a lower category. And in this case, if I give you an example, it would be that if you are suffering from self-esteem and your self-esteem is low, your morale is low, what you're going to do is you're going to invest more efforts in the relatedness category of needs, which is primarily a combination of needs which he clubbed as needs which are going to be related to love and belonging, and also to a certain extent bordering onto esteem needs. So his theory and his work that he has done over the years, is a distilled version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which are divided into 5 levels. And these two theories are considered more or less bordering on the same, let's say, parameters, and obviously, predicting the same outcomes. So the focus from here onwards, if we look at these two theories, Maslow's theory of needs and Alderfer's ERG theory, we are focused on understanding what are the basic needs, why you are working within the organization. Is it something which is related more to psychological needs? Is it more related to safety needs? Is it more related to your esteem or your self-actualization needs or growth needs? Essentially, that means you want personal growth and development, you want recognition. And if we are able to spot the reasons of why and what state of needs you want, then it helps the employers create a job or a job role for that person, and then appropriately have the description in such a way that it drives the individual to complete those goals, and in return the individual will end up getting rewards from the organizations which are commensurate to the functions which the employees is expected to perform. Now, next bit that we look at is basically the Herzberg's 2-factor theory. Now, Herzberg did a lot of research, and his main idea was that there are 2 factors which actually motivate employees. One is job satisfaction, which is more related to what are called hygiene factors, and the other is job dissatisfaction, which are more related to what are called motivational factors. So when we talk about his theory in particular, he suggested that there are only 2 ways in which employees can be made to work. If you provide hygiene factors, which means you provide favorable conditions or factors which are going to meet the motivation or the reason why the employees is wanting to work, then they would be happy to come into work and obviously complete the set of responsibilities given. And in this case, hygiene factors are classed as factors which could be salary, the job security, and the working conditions which are given, work environment essentially, which is provided to the employees. And this would motivate them to stay within the company and complete the job or the objectives given. On the other hand, the non-hygiene factors or motivational factors tend to be factors which are going to lead to job satisfaction, because the person in that job role likes the job role, knows that the employer takes care of him, or there are requisite resources provided for him to be able to do his job or her job properly. They are recognized in the job and the responsibility that they are, and if they do it well, they are rewarded, and there are plenty of opportunities for the employee to grow within the organization. So his theory was more or less based on two factors, which is the assumption that if you provide good conditions and you are good to your employee will be performing and they will stay in the job. But if the job conditions and you're not looking after or maybe not motivating your employees enough, they would be not, they would prefer not to stay with the organization, and you would have that person or the individual leaving the organization. And in this case, the organization essentially strives to increase employee satisfaction by doing things or creating enough motivators which allows the individual to stay with the organization. Now, a case in point, an example of this would be when you look at sales as a function. You look at sales, marketing, account management, somebody who's working towards or working within business development, they would look at this particular role. Mostly people would look at these type of roles from this point of view. If there's an enough demand, for the product, services of the company, and the company is providing resources for the person to be able to reach out and get that business, they would term that as motivators and they would stay with the organization. But if you see that the organization has not provided enough resources, and obviously the demand and of the products and services the company sells in the market to its customers is low, and there is high amount of competition, you would generally see that employees in this case would be dissatisfied with the company and its proposition, and obviously would not be looking at completing goals, and that would be termed as what are called non-hygiene factors, or factors which are not present for the let's put it this way, the factors are not conducive enough for the employees to be able to produce the desired output. And in this case, you would generally see job dissatisfaction, or employees, or in this case, people working within those roles being demotivated. So the two-factor theory essentially was focused on these two parameters, and what it did was it put what are called factors, in terms of hygiene and motivation factors. Now, these then can be looked at from a point of view of whether the employees would stay with the organization or would not stay with the organization, and whether they would do the jobs or fulfill the job role or will not fulfill the job role. And from an organizational point of view, the role of the HR or role of the manager tends to be to improve the working conditions, to make sure resources and opportunities are available so that the job satisfaction is high and people are able to complete the roles and responsibilities given within the organization. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there is plenty of study which has been done by Abraham Maslow, which primarily looked at proposing the pyramid, which is called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this particular pyramid, when we look at, basically organizes the needs of individuals on the basis of 5 different categories. And these 5 different categories of needs are essentially identified by employers. And what they do is when they make the job descriptions, these 5 needs are identified, and then suitable, factors are put into place so that the individual remains motivated. And because of the motivation being there, or the individual being motivated to do and perform in return for the needs that they are fulfilling, that would allow the individual to remain motivated and stay within the organization. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is how he coined these needs as. And obviously, when we look at his particular model, his model is very, very favorably accepted within large organizations, wherein we see employees working at different levels and they're having different types of needs. So, for example, if you were finishing your university and you were attending a pre-placement talk with an employer, and this would be your first job, you'd be primarily looking at, maybe fulfilling your psychological needs, which is more or less to do with ensuring that, you're basically looking at starting off in your life by earning, say, for example, for the first time, and those bits, for your salary would be essentially paying for, food, water, say, for example, clothing and, basic needs, which is what you would want to fulfill yourself on and become independent. So when we talk about, content theories, we talk about these major types. Apart from that, the last one that we want to look at is the McClelland's theory, which primarily, is based on, again, the theory of needs. And David McClelland, which was an American psychologist, and what he did was he looked at, there are 3 different types of needs that he felt people are motivated by. And these 3 types of needs tend to be the need for achievement, affiliation, and power. So his theory is also influenced by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what he did was, in his research and in his studies, he looked at dividing or classifying these factors, which are motivators for employees, into 3 different types. And they tend to be achievement, affiliation, and power. So when we talk about these needs, these 3 different types of needs, need for achievement, need for affiliation, and need for power, we then refer to what is called the McClelland's theory of needs. And this is where what we generally see in organizations. If I give you an example right now, in terms of, McClelland's theory, if you look at smaller organizations wherein generally people tend to be taking on multiple roles, you would generally see at some stage, it is more about employees or individuals within that organization looking at, if I bring more to the table, I should get more responsibility, or I should wield more power. I should have more decision-making power or more budgets to be able to, manage what the organization needs me to, or the organization needs from us, or in this case, the individual. And when we talk about, the McClelland's theory, an example that I would suggest would be that sometimes when we look at, let's say, maintaining good relationships, what we are looking at is that we want to be planting, our feet, or let's say, in this case, making plans that are going to obviously be useful for us in terms of achieving maybe a greater goal. And that would be looking at, by affiliation, trying to, build a relationship with certain set of individuals or maybe an organization. And these links over a point in time, this particular relationship over a point of time, would help us bring additional business into the organization, because you have maintained, let's say, a good relationship. You've stayed in touch. You've planted the initial seeds of, maybe looking at, say, by providing information, by providing, timely information to the client. And at some stage, when they go into a buying decision phase, they would come back to you preferably because you are the one who essentially initially provided information on the product, or, gave them instances of how the product or the service is going to be useful to them. And last but not the least, because you have been in their consideration set for a period of time, this need of affiliation then pushes the customer to place the order with you as against a competitor, because they feel that they have established a relationship, and over a point in time, this will lead to, increased business. So when we talk about, in general, McClelland's theory, we are looking at 3 factors: achievement, affiliation, and power. And these 3 factors essentially tend to be identified by managers and obviously leaders within the organization. And depending on where your priorities are, whether it is for affiliation, whether it's for achievement, whether it's for power, you are going to be looking at these basic needs for the employees. And basis that, what you're going to do is create a job description and a role which will allow them to function accordingly, or, fulfill those functions accordingly, and thereby achieving the organizational goals and objectives. So when we look at, in general, in these theories, which are basically content theories, we are basically looking at, understanding the basic part of that. Here, the content theories are going to be focused on factors that motivate the individuals in a workplace. How are you motivated, and what is it in for you? So it is about you, and that is why they are content theories. Any questions on this?
No, sir.
Okay. The second part of the theories that we look at is basically process theories. So when we talk about process theories in general, we are going to be looking at theories which have the employees working for the employer, but thereby, in this sense, when I said, when we look at process theories, one of the things which employees would be looking at doing would be to utilize their cognitive process. That means their mental abilities to be able to, participate in the decision-making process. And this would keep them engaged with the organization for the purposes of carrying out the, objectives of fulfilling the objectives. Now, when we talk about these particular theories, there is one which we thought of start with, which is the process theories, is the Adams equity theory. Now, when we look at Adams equity theory, he came across, Stacey Adams is the person who recommended this or came out with this theory, in 1963. And he basically used his theory to explain the employee behavior and the link between employee behavior and motivation. So the main aspects that I would say him and his team looked at was that they classified motivation, and they basically looked at, when I say classified, what I mean by that is they went into understanding what could be the reasons why employees are motivated, and what is in turn they expect as a fair return for the motivation that they show towards the employees to achieve aims and objectives. So when we look at defining, say for example, the Adams equity theory, we can also relate that in the form of input and output. So what employees look at is what I put into the job is things like time, effort, my skills, my experience, tolerance, flexibility, integrity, commitment, and what I get from my job in return as an output is pay, bonus, perks, maybe a secure job security. Maybe I get recognition because if I'm able to exceed my targets or, complete my goals early, then I get recognition. I am looking at the organization developing me further. And in some cases, the organization would also look at praising, rewarding, and, in turn, promotion or promoting the employee to a senior level or a higher level of job responsibility. So when we talk about Adams equity theory, he proposed that there is, obviously a direct relationship between employee behavior and motivation. And this is seen in the form of input versus output. So if employees put in time, effort, show loyalty, and they are able to, they show integrity, loyalty, and they are able to put in the efforts, then at the end of it, in terms of rewards, what they expect as output tend to be pay, bonus, recognition, benefits, any sort of, say, reward or appraisal, which would essentially be seen as let's say, as a reward from the organization towards the employee. And this theory, when it was proposed, it basically was, developed from a point of view of the motivation of studying how employees are how much employees are satisfied within their job, and what is the relationship between the motivation and behavior of the employees with regards to working within the organization. Now, there were a number of implications, and there were also criticisms for his theory, but generally the way in which it was proposed and the input versus outputs side of things, sometimes it was felt that this theory missed the main point, which is looking at understanding what could employers do to maintain and upgrade the motivation of employees working within the organization. So an employee's motivation at work is very, very important and is largely driven by the sense of fairness which the organization brings while dealing with different employees in the organization. Now, if the employees feel that they have a bit of a, let's say, edge over the inputs that they bring, and they do not get the responses in terms of output, which is basically pay, bonus, incentives, or recognition, then you would generally see employees leaving the organization, or even the organization not meeting its goals and objectives because it is not effectively able to manage the expectation of employees from a point of view of keeping them, instead of using the word motivation, I will use keeping them within the organization or keeping them working for the organization. Now, when we talk about Latham and Locke's theory, this theory essentially proposes that individuals are motivated by setting which is specific and goals which are challenging. So in general, when we talk about Latham and Locke, which is the goal setting theory, which is what they proposed, they were quite clear that when they carried out these studies, they were essentially looking at businesses achieving greater success or more turnover or greater heights, whichever way you call it. But what they wanted to do was, in general, look at applying these specific and measurable goals which the employees would be ending up achieving. And this would then give the employees a better sense of direction and make them more productive. So in their theory, what they looked at was 5 principles, what they proposed. These 5 principles, were that if the organization has clarity of message, is able to provide a challenge in the job role that they set for the employees, then employees would show, and obviously organizations and employees have commitment to their job roles and they are willing to take feedback, then you would see the tasks are being completed effectively, and thereby keeping the employees motivated towards the organization and looking for the next challenge essentially to take up, and then organization moving forward to achieving its goals. So in this particular theory, sometimes we also look at 5 R's. Now, these 5 R's tend to be, the R's of result, reason, reflection, resources, and responsibilities. And these are sometimes also looked at when employees look at joining the organization, because it's all about goals and it's all about meeting the expectation of those goals. And then at the end of it, once the goals are met, the employees are expecting rewards. What they would reason out is that I would take up this job or I would take up this role only if the role is very challenging. And at the end of it, after completing the challenging job or the role, I would be suitably rewarded in my job. Then this is where managers would make use of the goal setting theory, and that would be to look at making sure that the employees are given appropriate goals which challenges them, but also gives them a sense of direction and makes them more productive within the organization. So there are various different connotations of the Locke's and Latham's goal theory, because in this case, when they look at the 5 R's of the theory, we also look at the 4 P's of goal setting in terms of organizations setting these goals for the employees, and they setting the goals which are having a positive outcome. They would be personally challenging to the employee. They will also be realistic goals, but at the same time, realistic means, I would say, possible. And then in this context, these can be prioritized by the employee clearly in order to achieve, because at the end of it, the employee is going to be looking at the rewards, and those rewards would come because the organization has put put this job up as a challenge, and if the challenge is completed, then the employee is in line to receive a reward for that achievement of that target or achievement of that particular goal. And that is where this particular theory would be relevant. Now, when we talk about Potter's and Lawler's theory, they proposed this particular theory in the early 1970s or late 60s, I think. And there the theory was primarily based on the fact that the individuals are motivated by expectations in terms of what behavioral outcomes are going to be seen or provided by the employer. So what I mean by that is that when they propose this particular model, they propose that there are conditions in which employees look at working, and there are processes that they follow. And sometimes if policies and processes are followed and conditions are met, still if the goals are not achieved, then the organization looks at putting in place contingencies, thereby recognize that why the goal was not achieved was not because of the employee, but because of the circumstances or external competition. And in this case, in order for them to be motivated, it still keeps incentives and rewards in place to ensure that the staff is motivated to work or to take that work or pick up that work. Now, this particular theory, when we look at in general, in terms of Potter's theory, we relate it to what is called job satisfaction. Now, here, what we are looking at is that the theory proposed that there is a link between how people are motivated internally or externally in order to deliver performance. And when we talk about the factors of internal and external, what I mean by that is I'm talking and referring to intrinsic and extrinsic factors of motivation. So sometimes you would see that employees would essentially be motivated by intrinsic factors, and that would mean that they are basically looking at let's say internal things or belongings which are important for them. And that would mean that in this case they are doing an activity which is primarily because they feel that this is their inherent behavior and it cannot be separated from what they do or how they do it, and this is a part and parcel of their personality or their behavior. So when we look at dealing with people who are intrinsically motivated, you would generally see a person is either fun-loving or is somebody who's challenged by, or is somebody who takes up challenges. And here, thereby, what they would want to do is, achieve the goals and objectives by understanding and taking up challenges which they feel they need to take up because it is going to be good for them, or it is going to be something which is an activity that they want to take. And this activity, because it challenges them from a point of view of their personal characteristics, would be good for them in the long run, and they would be interested in taking that up and delivering on those objectives. Now, when we talk about, examples of intrinsic motivation, here probably would be that I participate in a sport because it's fun. And as I looked at, as I showed you in that video, intrinsic motivation was that I do this because it's fun for me and I enjoy it, rather than I'm doing it to win a reward or, get an incentive. So intrinsic tends to be inner self. It tends to be more you and why you would do it. And it is directly related to your behavior. You're not too worried about, the reward side of things. And essentially you're doing it because you feel this is something that you like, or this is something that you would want to do because of the fact that it is related to you, whether it's fun, it's simple, it's easy, or any such reason. When we talk about extrinsic, so here we are looking at motivation, which is looking primarily wherein you are participating in an activity-based, let's say setting, and, getting praise and approval or winning against the competition is important. And for that, you are going to be getting a reward. So extrinsic tends to be external, intrinsic tends to be internal. And an example of extrinsic motivation is going to be when I'm looking at showing a certain form of behavior, or the way I'm performing or I'm completing a particular job role is primarily because there is, at the end of it, I'm going to be paid for that job, or I'm going to be getting something as an add-on for the job that I complete. And that is where, you are going to ensure that the factors which motivate you to do that job, at the end of it, help you achieve the reward that is set by the organization. So Potter's and Lawler's expectancy theory is based on expectations, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic. It tends to be basis the performance, and also what kind of challenges or tasks, challenging tasks which can be set by the employer, and that would be the reason why they would be looking at likely a higher reward if it's a more challenging job or a more bigger challenge. And in some cases, the rewards and the higher rewards they get would essentially be the motivation factor for them to take up that particular role. Now, a simple example is that sometimes in organizations, when we talk about, let's say if I put the example of expectancy theory, generally what happens is if you've been a star performer in an organization and you're doing well in your field, what happens is year after year, you're achieving 100% or meeting all your goals and objectives. But in order to grow further, what is happening is that your motivational levels are dropping because you find either the job is too easy, or in some cases you find that I'm with little effort you are able to meet the criteria easily. So what you're expecting would be for the employer to set more aggressive goals, and in return for achieving those aggressive goals, they are going to reward you more in terms of either money-wise incentives, reputation-wise incentive, or appraisals in terms of praise within the organization. And that is what will drive you, and that is what your expectation is. And that is where I think the Prowlers and the Potters and the Lawlers theory essentially comes in. One of the last theories that we want to look at in terms of process theories is looking at the self-determination theory. And the self-determination theory here looks at proposing that individuals are motivated by the inherent need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So again, going back to ERG's concept there, wherein instead of the aspect of, when we talk about ERG theory, there were three aspects, which is existence, relatedness, and growth. Here we are replacing, we are keeping relatedness, we are, basically changing growth with competence, and we are changing existence to autonomy. That means you want your role to be autonomous, you want to have independent decision-making ability, or in your case, sometimes we hear the term that, I don't want any interference in my role. I want an independent role within the organization, or because you've been doing so well in the organization decides to give you an independent role to run a strategic business unit or run a different branch or an operations of the business, because they see that that is what is going to drive you and motivate you to stay within the organization. So this theory is more about suggesting that individuals are likely to be motivated if they have a sense of control over their work, and they feel that they have the abilities and the experience to be able to, take on these challenges. And that is where organization would, look at dipping into the self-determination theory to say that, okay, we've had this person in the organization for so long, he has had 10 or 20, 25 years of experience. I think it is time for us to allow this person to, take control and then manage some part of the business independently. And that would be in the case and as an example of self-determination theory. Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Any questions at your end, Faizan? Any questions, Ira? Okay.
No, sir.
All right.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. So what I will do is, there is a handout that I have on motivational theories. I think it's an 11-page handout which I've summarized, from books. This is a Pearson book that I've looked at it from, and this particular motivational theory handout, which I will put on Moodle, is a Word document, and this would summarize all the different theories that you need to be aware of from a point of view of motivational theories. And if you go through this in a bit more detail, you would be able to understand how these theories look into taking into account different factors, behavior, the aspect of internal and external motivators. And over the years, what has happened is the grouping of these theories have been done into two different types to categorize them, and they tend to be process oblique, content theories. Now, what I would do at this stage is, because we've covered the motivation theories in a bit of detail.
Hello, sir. Excuse me.
Go on.
I have a question regarding motivation itself,
Yes.
particularly the difference between intrinsic motivation and inspiration.
Okay. So when we look at intrinsic motivation, when we look at talking about intrinsic motivation, what we mean by that is that we are looking at doing an activity which is of interest to an individual, and completing that activity would essentially be giving you the satisfaction, that you want or that you are seeking as an individual. So here the person would be more acting to complete the job because they are finding it fun, or maybe they are finding it, more satisfying and challenging in order to do the job, rather than to look at the rewards. Because at the end of it, to completing the job, when they don't look at the rewards, or don't pay attention that they would be looking at getting a reward. So if I put it in other words, intrinsic motivation is going to be you doing it because it's internal to you. And why do you do it? It could be because of various reasons. I want to just take up a challenge. I want to do it because it's fun. I want to do it because it is something which gives me, some sort of satisfaction that I've achieved this as a job, or I've achieved this as an objective, as a challenge. And you are not too worried about whether you are going to do this job or complete a particular job because there is a reward or some sort of a end result which is waiting for it. So you're not too fussed about, looking at getting reward for the job that you're doing. Now, what was the other aspect that you were asking? Inspiration.
Yes, sir.
Right. So when we talk about inspiration as a concept, it is going to be more something that you are motivated to do spontaneously. We don't see this happening most obviously because of the fact that when we talk about motivation tends to be that is the reasons or the factors which are going to drive you to be able to, complete certain jobs or complete certain activities. And in result, you are expecting something at the end of it. It could be a wage or a pay at the end of the month, or it could be recognition, or it could be, reward or some sort of a reward. But when we talk about inspiration, here it is basically the process through which you are doing it because you are mentally stimulated. You're doing it because you are brings out your creativity, and you're doing it because it comes from within. It is not something which is under a compulsion that you're doing. It is something that you're doing on your own free will, and it tends to be something that you do long term. And you don't want a change in that condition, because you are essentially doing it for the purposes of either deriving a sense of achievement of creativity, or maybe a sense of achievement of being challenged. And that is what I would say would be inspiration. Motivation, on the other end, would be slightly different, because it is using your experience, maybe using your background and your skills, and it is primarily to fulfill certain objectives. So when you do it to the fulfillment of certain objectives, towards the end of it, you expect a reward, you expect some sort of a compensation to come to you, and that is where it will be also affected by outside factors, which would mean that in this case, your motivation might be low because your employer might not be paying enough incentive for you to complete the job. But when you look at elsewhere, what will happen is that the same type of job would be getting more incentive or maybe more, reward for completing. And that is where you will feel, I'm not motivated here enough and I need to switch my job or switch my organization. So motivation is more about stimulation. Inspiration is more about being mentally stimulated to be able to achieve something or do something which drives you. And generally, these things tend to be more of creative, more followed for personal pursuit rather than organizational pursuit. So motivation for organizational pursuit, inspiration for personal pursuit, if I put it this way in short. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, what I want to do is obviously, stop the session here today and then provide the handouts to you for coverage of and reading into a bit more detail about motivational theories. Now, what I'm going to do is upload the entire presentation today onto Moodle, and they will also be looking into the application of motivational theories that I've done. And we will be discussing some of the characteristics of some of the models of, Hackman and Oldham, the JCM model in particular, and how do we look at applying these motivational theories from an organizational standpoint of view. So this part of the session we are going to cover as part 2. And what I'm going to leave you with is, when I upload the presentation, the handout on the motivational theories, which is something that I would expect you to read, because they will be useful for you when we discuss this learning outcome in part 2 and look at the application of these theories with examples of how they are put to use in the organization. So as of now, it's more or less theoretical understanding, and it is more to do with understanding how what is the background and history of these theories, how the work originated. But in the second part of the session that we will do next time would be to look at applying these to an organizational, applying these theories from within an organizational perspective, and that will be tomorrow that I will cover with you same time. Is that okay?
Yes,
Yes,
that's
sir.
fine.
Good stuff. So thank you so much for joining the session today, and I will catch up with you same time tomorrow, and we will discuss part 2 of the learning outcome 2.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care.